Hello, everyone. Welcome to IKMAS EAIR Caucus, East Asian International Relations Forum. I am Dr. Hu Chu-ping from University Kebangsaan Malaysia or National University of Malaysia. We are very honored today to have a visiting fellow to IKMAS from University of Bologna, Dr. Andrea Passeri, to provide us a talk on this very crucial issue at the moment. So Myanmar after the coup and what kind of position that Myanmar would take in its foreign policy, and we will also discuss about Myanmar's place in ASEAN in the moment. So this forum is mainly co-hosted by IKMAS and also EAIR Caucus. So let me invite Professor Dr. Sufyan Jusso, Director of IKMAS, to deliver his welcoming remark. Professor, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hu Chu-ping, for the introduction. And I would like to thank our two speakers today. The main speaker is Dr. Andrea Passeri, who is our visiting fellow at the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, and he's also adjunct professor at the University of Bologna. And then we have also Dr. Naypyidaw Kipgen, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Jindal University, Global University in Delhi. So welcome to both of you. I would like to thank Dr. Hu Chu-ping and Associate Professor Dr. Kwik Cheng Chui for organizing this event. This is a very important event. Before I go on and on, I would like to also welcome, I see on the line, Professor Dr. Corrado Letta, whom I must have met some time back. He sent me an email. Thank you very much. We should keep in touch again. Right. This is a very interesting discussion. Myanmar, very close to my heart, very close to Andrea's heart, and I think very close to Dr. Kipgen's heart as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been working in Myanmar since the past 6-7 years. I was very optimistic about Myanmar, although a lot of people ask me why I spent so many years, and in those 7 years, I spent like 10 days in a month in Yangon and some other parts of Myanmar. That's how close I was with the country. And I started my journey in Myanmar when it was in transition from the military government to the civilian government. I met Aung San Suu Kyi when she was still the leader of the opposition in the parliament in Naypyidaw. And then there was an election, there was handover of power. Along the way, everyone was becoming very optimistic about the future of Myanmar. I was one of those who really promote Myanmar throughout the world. I conducted 2 seminars at the Oxford University on Myanmar. And on the 1st of February 2021, it's actually on my birthday, things went all of a sudden it's becoming like, I do not know what hit them or what hit me. We saw the coup d'etat, and although it's not officially recognized as coup d'etat, but it's actually a coup d'etat. And I found it very difficult to accept the fact that, you know, in this current situation when Myanmar is moving, people not only I saw that from the economic perspective, but because I spent like 10 days in a month in Myanmar, I met with many Burmese people, and they were so looking forward to becoming one of the most important economies in ASEAN. They were moving past Laos, they were catching up with Cambodia, and I was saying then, look, in the next 5 years, they will probably be able to catch up with Vietnam. So now, I do not know whether we should turn the clock 60 years behind. So that's quite, I dare not say more than that. This is not my event. So let's hear from Dr. Andrea Passeri and Associate Professor Dr. Kipgen for their evaluation. And I think I just hope this would not be our first session on these new issues in Myanmar. Let's make this as one of the beginnings, and we should probably have a few more sessions to discuss the various perspectives of Myanmar, from the democratic, from the military side, from the democracy, from economics, and of course today we will speak on foreign policy. So again, I would like to thank everybody, all the participants for joining, and Dr. Hu, Dr. Quick, Dr. Passeri, Dr. Kipgen for their contribution for this event. Thank you very much. Have a good discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Sufyan, for your kind words and warm welcoming. So allow me to introduce Dr. Andrea Passeri. So Dr. Andrea Passeri is currently his latest appointment, senior lecturer at the International Relations and Strategic Studies Department at University of Malaya. So he is still associated with IKMAS as our visiting fellow since last year. So at the same time, he is also adjunct professor in international relations of East Asia at the University of Bologna, Italy. So his scholarly research has been focusing on the foreign policy and alignment strategies of Southeast Asian countries, particularly Myanmar. His writings has appeared in many journals such as Pacific Review, Journal of Northeast Asian History, Italian Review of Geopolitics, among others. He also has published op-eds related on Myanmar in East-West Center, Asia Pacific Bulletin, Myanmar Times, International Affairs Institute commentaries, among others. So let's welcome and hear from Dr. Andrea Passeri. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hu. I would like, of course, to start by expressing my gratitude to you and to Professor Kuik for organizing this event, for having me today, for a very timely discussion on what's going on in Myanmar. I would like to thank, of course, our audience. I would like to thank Professor Sufyan for his kind introduction. I had the pleasure to meet him during my amazing time at IKMAS, and it's great to see him again, even though in a virtual format. And of course, I want to also express my gratitude to Dr. Kipgen for being us today as the discussant of today's event. His expertise on Myanmar is absolutely outstanding, and I can't wait to hear also his own take on the unfolding events. As we were saying, the topic of today's discussion is extremely timely, is quite disheartening, I would say, for a number of reasons, and it is also extremely complex. So since I don't want to ramble on in a random way for hours, maybe I have few notes and few data here with me that will hopefully allow me to respect my time limit. And in a nutshell, what I'll try to provide to you is a preliminary, absolutely preliminary assessment on the foreign policy implications of Myanmar's military takeover, which entails five aspects, five main points. I will start by recalling what's going on in the country right now, the what's, the hows, and the whys of the military takeover. I will then briefly look at the civil disobedience movement, CDM, that is emerging to confront the military takeover. We will then sketch out a preliminary analysis of the international reaction to the coup d'etat, and we will then also briefly consider the historical precedents. Since Myanmar's history with military juntas is so long and so troubled, we will actually see if history can actually teach us something on the diplomatic implications and repercussions of the military takeover. And at the end, before wrapping up my presentation, we will try to formulate some assumptions on Myanmar's future international trajectory, while also evaluating the prospects of a foreign policy shift towards a negative form and blend of neutralism. The coup, as we all know, took place on February the 1st by the local army, the local armed force, which are also known as Tatmadaw. Immediately after assuming power, they established a year-long state of emergency and imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi and other leading figures of the previous government, the National League for Democracy government. Since day one, a civil disobedience movement, CDM, emerged to contrast the military takeover. And in turn, this movement was matched by escalating violence from the military. As of today, we have more than 120 confirmed casualties and more than 2,100 civilians arrested for their participation in the rallies and demonstrations of all sorts that are taking place in Myanmar right now. Martial law was also imposed in various areas of the country, specifically in Yangon, to protect industrial assets and foreign interests, especially Chinese ones. And as we are also well aware, the coup follows and is partially motivated by the NLD's electoral triumph at the 2020 general elections, which was nullified by the army due to alleged frauds, which have not been proved yet by the Tatmadaw. More generally, we should also consider that the coup puts an end to the hybrid regime hybrid and proto-democratic regime that was established in Myanmar between 2008 and 2010 with the drafting of a new constitution and the partial devolution of powers to a civilian government. Another key characteristic of this coup, at least to me, is that it is very hard to explain from a rational standpoint. Why? Well, because the previous regime, the Aung San Suu Kyi regime, had proved its loyalty to the generals and did its best to protect their interests. And if we think at the image of Aung San Suu Kyi standing in front of the International Court of Justice to defend the brutalities perpetrated against the Rohingya community, we can clearly see that the previous regime had found a modus vivendi with the army. Probably this coup has more to do with the personal ambitions of the Tatmadaw's leadership, and in particular with General Min Aung Hlaing, which is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and its looming retirement due to an age limit. So this can be a viable explanation, together with the general's determination in defending their business interests, which revolve around two military conglomerates that are the main source of revenues and hard currency for the military itself. So in a way, this is a coup that can be portrayed as a military takeover motivated by the thirst for power and wealth of the Tatmadaws leadership. What about the civil disobedience movements that emerged in response to the unfolding events? Well, it is absolutely unprecedented, both in scale and in terms of the resilience that has been displayed by the protesters, and the CDM totally caught the military by surprise. There are various segments of the Burmese society which are actively involved in the protests. We have the students who actually took to the streets since the very aftermath of the coup. We have Buddhist monks, we have white collars who are basically paralyzing the country with a series of strikes. And Facebook is also a key battleground in this struggle between the military and Myanmar's civil society. The government is, of course, the new junta is, of course, shutting down internet access on a daily basis, but protesters know how to circumvent these obstacles. And they are acquiring these expertise thanks also to the pivotal role played by the Generation Z, the post-millennial generation, which is trying with success to link the protest with a broader regional scenario that encompasses the Milk Tea Alliance and the foreign netizens currently operating in countries like Thailand, like Taiwan, and Hong Kong for sure. These growing transnational civil society solidarity movements in Southeast Asia are definitely a new and significant development which deserves further scrutiny from a scholarly point of view. However, the brutal crackdown is also fomenting a segment of the CDM to resort to armed insurgency, to resort to violence. And this definitely projects Myanmar on the verge of a civil war, which is by far the worst case scenario that we are currently facing. The military takeover is paving the way, of course, also for dramatic economic repercussions. Just to give you an idea, fuel and food prices are absolutely soaring. Rice is up by 30% in certain areas of Myanmar, whereas fuel prices are up by 15% countrywide. And unfortunately, this means that the poorest segments of the society are the ones who will most probably bear the highest cost of this crisis. The stock trading is down by 60%, is basically collapsing. Industrial output is also at a record low due to the strikes and to the damaging of plants and critical infrastructures. FDIs are expected to further dry up due to political instability, and this expected outflow follows a prolonged period of contraction, which stems from the Rohingya crisis first, back in 2017, 2018, and then, of course, from the COVID pandemic. Light industry, Myanmar's light industry is also at risk under the threat of trade sanctions, and this would be a mortal blow for Myanmar's economy. The garment sector is actually the driving force behind Myanmar's exports, and in this respect, just to give you an idea, clothing exports to Europe grew almost 40% in 2020 alone, in the midst of an incredible, unprecedented economic crisis brought about by the pandemic. And on top of that, Myanmar is also facing a looming banking crisis together with cash flow difficulties. So there is definitely a deep impact of the crisis on Myanmar's economic outlook. Moving to the international reaction, I will give you a general picture first, and then we can probably have a sneak peek on the most important countries and international interlocutors of Myanmar. The international response has displayed once again, when it comes to Myanmar, a West-East divide. The international reaction is completely split into two camps. We have on one end the West, which is informed as usual by its normative diplomacy, and the West is pointing its finger against Myanmar and it's threatening and/or imposing new sanctions. On the other side of this spectrum, instead, we have China, we have Japan, we have India and ASEAN countries who are opting for a quieter and more pragmatic, let's say, approach, which is mostly rooted in their strict adherence to the principle of non-interference. And the same kind of divergence arose in 2017 during the Rohingya crisis, and even before that in 1988 with the harsh repression of Burmese pro-democracy movements. The problem with the Western reaction, however, is that sanctions have already failed with Myanmar's leadership in the past. And just the expression, the idea of formulating targeted, so to say, sanctions seems to be an oxymoron when it comes to Myanmar, simply because the junta knows exactly how to bypass these sanctions and how to confiscate the aid that has been channeled inside the country to help and support Myanmar's civil society. So the key question, the key dilemma here for many, many capitals in the West is how to constructively and effectively engage a regime that openly defies international norms and a military apparatus that is protected by the diplomatic support of very important actors such as China and the Russian Federation. More specifically, what are these Western countries doing to pressure the junta? Well, the US strengthened its sanctions against the military. They froze their foreign assets. The UK drafted a UN resolution urging the restoration of democracy, but China and Russia's vetoes blocked this resolution. New Zealand has suspended all high-level contacts and imposed travel bans on Tatmadao's top figures. European Union is tightening its arms embargo against the armed forces, which was already in place, and is currently formulating new measures to actually target the military conglomerates. Australia suspended military cooperation and is currently trying to redirect its aid towards Myanmar civil society. And Facebook and YouTube, which are by far heavyweights in international relations in today's world, have imposed vast restrictions on content and profiles run by the military. YouTube, for instance, terminated 5 channels that were used for propaganda purposes by the Tatmadaw. Moving to the Asian camp, to East Asian countries, well, the PRC, of course, China. China described the coup as a major internal reshuffle. They blocked the UK drafted resolution. A few days later, China offered a mediation, but over the course of the last week, they also threatened very drastic actions against the burning of Chinese factories. So we can definitely see some zigzags and the sticks and carrots approach, which is probably motivated by China's huge stakes in Myanmar. What we can say for sure, however, is that instability hurts Chinese interests in the country. Japan, well, Japan opted for a very muted, very low profile reaction. Actually, we are still waiting for an official declaration or a statement from Japan's prime minister. And this low profile attitude is mostly rooted in Japan's fear to lose influence and to lose ground vis-à-vis China inside Myanmar. Korea, South Korea is an extremely interesting and deviant, so to say, example, because Seoul is currently standing out as the most vocal in East Asia, probably together with Singapore in denouncing the coup. The Korean parliament passed a bipartisan resolution urging the restoration of democracy. And few days ago, the government also enforced an arms embargo against the Tatmadaw. Thailand referred to the coup as internal matters and is also providing some sort of legitimacy to the new junta, because they welcomed a few weeks ago Myanmar's new foreign minister during his first visit abroad. Russia must be also taken into account. Russia is a key provisioner of military hardware, so they are actually backing the Tatmadaw, and Moscow is definitely looking at the military takeover as an opportunity to increase its footprint and influence inside Myanmar. Against this backdrop, we can, for instance, consider that Myanmar is the first recipient right now of Russia's drones export. And it's also the first country in Southeast Asia to approve the Sputnik anti-COVID vaccine. India, similarly to Japan, India is adopting a very prudent and cautious approach, which is partially dictated by its adherence to the principle of non-interference, but also by New Delhi's wariness of losing ground compared to China. What about ASEAN? Well, ASEAN is still seen by many, myself included, actually as the best hope for a de-escalation and a diplomatic solution to the crisis. ASEAN already played this role in other crises, domestic crises like the Cambodian civil war. So this is probably the best solution that we have to find a credible mediation to the ongoing crisis. The problem with ASEAN, however, is that it is not speaking with one voice when it comes to Myanmar's takeover. There are countries like Singapore who are extremely vocal, and on the other extreme, actors like Thailand and Cambodia who are definitely laying low and adopting a low profile. So the result of this forced compromise between the different views inside ASEAN was the association's chair statement, which was issued at the beginning of March, and which calls on all parties to seek a peaceful solution to the crisis. Of course, ASEAN's reaction has attracted some sort of criticism from the West due to its alleged softness, but Westerners should actually realize that ASEAN's internal diplomacy works according to different and quite peculiar principles that, as I was saying before, already ensured important diplomatic success in the past. Moving on the impact of this crisis on Myanmar's foreign policy. Well, of course, in a way, it's too early to say because the new regime has not made any substantial diplomatic move yet. However, Myanmar's long history with military regimes can provide us with some insights, with some indications. And there are, of course, three historical precedents that should be taken into account. 1958, when Myanmar's parliamentary regime was actually completely destroyed by the first military takeover and by the establishment of a caretaker government. 1962, the coup of 1962, which brought Ne Win, General Ne Win, to a long-lasting military dictatorship, and 1988, when the most radical faction of the Tatmadaws took over after the pro-democracy popular protests. And the point is that after each of these coups, after each of these takeovers, Myanmar's international posture became more reactive, more inward-looking, and more nationalistic. And today's generals are informed by the same mindset, the same strategic culture that informed their predecessors since the late 50s. And one of the pillars of this strategic culture sees the Tatmadaws, the military, as the highest authority and veto player in Myanmar's politics, as well as a bulwark against its fragmentation, balkanization, and or satellization under the orbit of a great power, of a foreign actor. So for sure, the coup prompts the end of Naypyidaw's reintegration on the global stage, which started 10 years ago. In the future, the military regime will probably stick to the traditional diplomatic playbook utilized by its predecessor, a diplomatic playbook based on the notion of neutralism. The key question is which kind of neutralism, though, because Myanmar has always projected a neutralist stance in international affairs, albeit in different and sometimes opposite ways. This pendulum, the pendulum of Myanmar's diplomacy, has traditionally swung between two poles, I would say, positive non-alignment on one end and negative neutralism on the other. Positive non-alignment was showcased, for instance, between 1948 and 1962, and then was revived during the last decade through the employment of a quite sophisticated hedging strategy that was designed to reduce Myanmar's over-dependence on China and to actually bridge and to create some series of counter-checks by normalizing Myanmar's relations with the West. Negative neutralism instead was the key reference, the key pillar behind Myanmar's diplomacy under military rule since the early 60s, and probably reached its zenith, its apex, between 1988 and 2010, when Myanmar was totally isolated on the international stage. So in my humble opinion, the takeover may trigger yet another stage marked by Myanmar's aloofness and self-marginalization in the international arena. Which are the key features of Myanmar's negative neutralism, at least when it comes to its past adoption by the predecessors of today's general? Well, this notion is often described in the scholarly debate also as negative neutralism for group survival, because its main interest lies in the protection of the ruling elite rather than in the advancement of the country's best interest. On top of that, Myanmar's negative neutralism has historically been inward-looking, reactive, torpid. It appears immature and quite xenophobic in its worldview. It is extremely diffident towards multilateral institutions. And in a nutshell, it seeks autonomy and independence in the international arena through self-isolation, through disengagement from the diplomatic dimension. And this is actually conducive, and this allows the regime to focus on the eradication of domestic dissent, which is right now is of course the #1 priority for the ruling junta. On the opposite side, positive non-alignment, the ideological platform that inspired Myanmar's diplomacy, especially between 2010 and 2015, is vibrant, is dynamic, is proactive in reaching out to a diversified range of potential partners on the international stage. Positive non-alignment sees multilateral fora as key avenues to unleash a multidimensional diplomacy. And this was clearly displayed by Myanmar during the 50s, for instance, when it gained a very important role inside the non-aligned movement, or also during 2014 when Naypyidaw was granted Myanmar's, ASEAN's rotational chairmanship. On top of that, positive non-alignment also entails an ethical tone that is based on the idea of goodwill diplomacy and seeks independence and autonomy by achieving a complex balance of the external influences operating inside the country rather than pushing towards disengagement from the international arena. So before closing, we can actually anticipate several trends that are going to shape Myanmar's foreign policy for the foreseeable future. With China, for instance, we may actually see a more deferent and accommodative stance by the Myanmar's military, but short of bandwagoning, because bandwagoning stands completely at odds with Myanmar's strategic culture. With the US, well, with the US, this crisis is definitely an early test for the Biden administration, and an early test for its determination and resolve in terms of democracy promotion. The White House is definitely concerned with democratic backsliding in Southeast Asia. So there are actually the prospects of an adversarial turn in bilateral relations between Washington and Naypyidaw. Japan, on the other hand, will be still considered by the junta as a high-value interlocutor and as the only viable counter-check, together with India, to China's influence inside Myanmar. For the same reason, the Myanmar's military won't shoot completely their door to ASEAN, because some degree of involvement within ASEAN is considered as an essential precondition to avoid Myanmar's total and complete isolation on the global stage. With India, as we were saying for Japan, the interests at stake, which encompass infrastructural project, but also anti-separatism, cooperation against along the shared border, push definitely for the preservation of cordial ties. And the same applies to Russia. There is a diplomatic honeymoon going on right now between Myanmar and Russia that is to a large extent fueled by Moscow's free riding when it comes to pressuring the military junta. So to sum up, before wrapping up my presentation and leaving space and time to our discussant and to our Q&A, I would say that there are 7 main takeaways to this crisis. The first one is that the coup is an epochal turning point for Myanmar's politics, a turning point that will probably completely reshape the landscape of Myanmar's politics, both domestically and internationally. Another important implication of these events revolves around the vitality and the resilience of Myanmar's civil society, which is probably showing that democratization processes can't be reversed or paused. These people experienced freedom, a relative degree of freedom and democracy during the last 10 years, and now they are simply ready to die for it. Another element that I want to stress is that the Tatmadaw right now is way more isolated than protesters, who are actually building alliances with other like-minded movements that are currently operating in Southeast Asia. The international community is split into 2 camps, as we said, and this definitely benefits the army, who is not confronting a united front, a united coalition of international actors. Myanmar is also right now a significant stress test for US-China relations in the post-Trump era, with the Biden administration siding with the protesters, and on the other hand, Beijing quietly supporting the Tatmadaw. ASEAN, as I said, is still the most credible mediator to stop the ongoing escalation and to avoid the prospects of a dramatic civil war. And last but not least, of course, negative neutralism as the most plausible and probable foreign policy approach that will be used by the military leadership in the foreseeable future. So I think that I'm going to stop here. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and to Professor Kipgen's remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andrea Passeri, for your very interesting sharing about those points. And allow me to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Naypyidaw Kipgen. Associate Professor Kipgen is currently Executive Director at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies and in the Jindaw School of International Affairs. And he has been teaching and researching on democratization. There is a book on democratization of Myanmar that was published a few years ago. And he has served as the country expert on Burma and Myanmar for the variety of consultation and also academic research project. So I have just read about a news that ethnic Chin soldier in Yangon actually joined the People's Coalition. So, so this young soldier of about 30 years old left the military because he can no longer tolerate the agenda of the military against the people. And yet again, what Dr. Passeri has shared with us about ASEAN being the most credible organization right now dealing with Myanmar, there are already voices that criticizing ASEAN about the lack of action over Myanmar coup. So let us now hear from Associate Professor Kipgen on his view. You have 10 minutes, Professor.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you to IKMAS. I mean, particularly thank you so much to Dr. Ping. If I remember correctly, it was about 6 years ago, I came to your center and I was giving a lecture there. And it's good. I mean, since then we have been good friends and we have been staying in touch over the years. And I appreciate you for inviting me to be a discussion here, and even if it's for 10 minutes. And of course, I would like to also say thank you to Dr. Passeri. He has given a very comprehensive picture of the coup, the implications and the possibilities. I'm just going to supplement what he has said, and of course make some maybe a different perspective in some places. So I would like to start off with, I mean, some of his points. First, I'll start with the CDM, then I'll come to the military motivation, then and I will come to the international aspect and the foreign relations, including the role of ASEAN, which Dr. Ping was just trying to emphasize about. So first, let me begin with the role of this CDM. This is something that I would say in many ways unprecedented, in the sense that if you look at the previous, the past military coups, of course, 1958 military caretaker was not a coup. It was invited by the civilian leadership. Therefore, we cannot consider it as a coup. 62, 88, and 2021. These are the three official coups we have seen over, I mean, the modern history of Myanmar or Burma. See what happened. What is peculiar about this time is that if you look at 1988, for example, which was so far the bloodiest and the most brutal crackdown, there was leadership in the sense that the students were the front runners. Of course, they were supported by civil servants and some Buddhist monks as well. But in this time around, there is no such front leadership. There is no group of people who are taking the torchbearer and acting as the voice of the people. The strength, I said this before the program actually started. I said this is something that we see unprecedented in the sense that people from different professions and different walks of life come together and sacrifice the job and I mean, they are ready to die. Why is this the case? Why does it make different from the previous coups? The first and foremost thing is that in many of these protesters, have not gone through the past military coups. 62, it was too long for them. I mean, they were not born yet. 88, some of them might have been born, but then most of these people were not born during that time. And in the past 10 years, even though it was imperfect democracy or incomplete democracy, the country showed these the tasted democracy in which the people began to have relations with the international community, see an opening in the society, and pursue what their dreams are, what its neighbors are doing, what the international community is doing. So for these protesters, it is whether do or die. I mean, they don't want to go back to the dark days of the history where the military says and the people follow without any resistance. They choose to die rather than being under military dictatorship. And I would like to bring the point here that many criticize Aung San Suu Kyi during her previous 5-year government. Of course, she deserved criticism for, especially in the way she handled the Rohingya crisis. But I mean, this time around, what happens is it's not just anymore about Aung San Suu Kyi or the National League for Democracy. It is now democracy versus military junta or dictatorial regime. So people are fighting for democracy and they're opposing any, let's come back of this military junta or dictatorial regime. This is the critical point. And what happened, what we saw in the past few weeks since the first military coup is that if you speak to these people, they say we have nothing to lose but to gain. That means they would rather sacrifice now than live maybe another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road under a military junta. So that's why in many ways, this is unprecedented. And this is very unique in the sense that the people without any clear leadership come together to oppose dictatorship, not necessarily to prevent, to protect, and to promote National League for Democracy, which won overwhelmingly in the 2020 election. This is the first point that I would like to talk about. Now, coming to the military's motivation. Dr. Passeri also talked about some of the possibilities and some of the motivations behind the coup. I just want to go a little bit further on that. Many who follow the developments in Myanmar know that military leader Min Aung Hlaing was supposed to retire in July this year. And there was incidences or events where the military leader expressed his desire and his interest to serve, to be in the government, to play, to enter politics, if we may put it that way. He had an interview with the Russian Weekly. And then even before that, he said, my experience in the military would help in the civilian government. So we saw that he was clearly interested in politics at some point. But the constitution that they drafted, the 2008 constitution, under that, he can be either the vice president or one of the three ministers that are appointed by the military, home, defense, or border affairs. But for Min Aung Hlaing, who considered himself to be what we call the supreme commander or the leader of the country, for him to take any of those roles is considered to be inferior or lesser than what we call the civilian leadership. Therefore, the only way for him to become the president of the country, which is the highest office in the land, is by winning or by having the support of the majority in the parliament, which is the national democracy. My sources tell me, I'm not quite sure whether this is absolutely true or not, but my sources tell me that Min Aung Hlaing wanted to be the president, and the NLD somehow denied or rejected that idea. And without the support of the majority members in the parliament, he was unable to become, he will not be able to become the president under the 2008 constitution. The only way for him to come or to become the president of the country is to, let's go back to the 2010 prior to election, and then create an environment whereby he will have let NLD choose Aung San Suu Kyi or de-register or prevent the party from participating in election. I believe it is possible that the military is likely to hold election after 1 year of the emergency, the power that the military just declared. It is possible that they might hold an election after a year, even though we have not seen a specific time frame or timeline. But what happens is, what are the electoral laws? They have already started repealing and trying to amend those laws in order to make sure that NLD does not win, or NLD is, let's say, prevented from contesting in the election, or Aung San Suu Kyi is never allowed to be in office again. These are the possibilities. We are not quite sure exactly what is going to turn out, but the suspicion is that the military is going to do things in a way whereby the NLD would never come back to a resounding victory again in the future elections. In fact, it is also possible that the military would prevent Aung San Suu Kyi from holding office again. So in case the electoral law says that anyone who is who faces criminal charges or any charges pending against them, which is the case with Aung San Suu Kyi right now. She has been charged with at least 4 or 5 charges so far, and it is likely that there may be other things that is coming up in the future. But even if there are no new charges, these are already sufficient enough for the military to say that NLD, you either expel your leader or you de-register yourself, which was exactly the case in 2010 before the election. And the NLD decided, of course, there was a splinter group which went ahead and contest the election. But majority of the NLD leadership, plus some of its ethnic-based parties and its allied groups among the ethnic communities, they were boycotting the 2010 election, under which the NLD had, the USDP, which was the military proxy party or the military backed party, had a win-win situation whereby the military appointed person, which was Thein Sein, the former army general, became the president of the country. And this is something that some, not many, but some scholars and some observers are closely following, whether Min Aung Hlaing is going to do exactly this path that was happening in 2010, even if he himself is not doing exactly what was done in 2010, he might appoint or he might nominate someone to be his proxy. So this is something that, apart from Dr. Passeri's observation of the military motivations, I just want to add this angle to the discussion. And finally, before I close my remarks, is about the international community. There is no doubt that the international community is divided. I have been appearing in television and radio programs, and I've been trying to highlight this issue. But this is not to be surprised, because we saw this was the case after the 1980 military coup. The international community was divided sharply. One group sanctions and another group engagement group. And we are saying more or less the same thing this time around. But what we would like to see this time around is especially the role of ASEAN, which I also believe that could play a very vital role in mediating. But the problem with ASEAN so far, apart from its non-interference in the internal affairs of member states and what we call conducting business on a consensus basis, these are the two big pictures or big issues. But apart from that, what happened, the problem with ASEAN in the past few weeks since the military coup, and why the people of Myanmar, especially the protesters and the NLD supporters, are not happy with what ASEAN is doing. In fact, I just got a message from somebody from Indonesia asking me to explain why the people of Myanmar are opposed to Indonesian foreign ministers' effort to bring some kind of mediation. See, the problem with these protesters, what they see a problem is that ASEAN is dealing with what they consider as illegitimate government, illegitimate military rule. They want ASEAN to engage with the NLD appointed, or let's say the CRPH, the committee representing Thein Sein, which is the Union Assembly, where the people who were elected in 2020 election. So since ASEAN leadership was not inviting these leadership, or they said the elected leaders, they were criticizing ASEAN and Indonesia in a way that they are recognizing or they are legitimizing an illegitimate regime. But again, despite these criticisms, I still believe that ASEAN is one of the most important and relevant institutions that can bring both sides into the discussion table. For example, if you look at 2008 Cyclone August, at a time the Western countries were trying to intervene on matters of humanitarian crisis, but Myanmar military leadership was strongly opposed to Western intervention in any form. So ASEAN intervened. They formed a task force whereby they facilitated this humanitarian effort and relief assistance. In that way, I still believe that whether it is formally or informally, ASEAN can still bring together, because at the moment, ASEAN is an institution which can still bring together the Western interests and China and Russia, and of course, the Japan, India, the regional partners. So I believe that ASEAN can play and should play important. But having said that, ASEAN should also involve there's what we call the CRPH, the committee representing the people's, the Thein Sein, so that both sides can accept the role of ASEAN. And finally, before I conclude, just want to say one thing. Where is the crisis headed? Me and myself included, many of us were, since from day one, it is a matter of time the military is going to use lethal force, and there will be more deaths, and possibly there would be what we call humanitarian crisis. We would say the exodus of many refugees into neighboring countries. In fact, Dr. Ping just mentioned about the Chin police. It's not just one, Dr. Ping. There are, in fact, I saw in the news that at least 300 people from Myanmar have already fled to the northeast India, which includes many police personnel and their family members. I think if this brutality continues, and if the protesters are not backing down, in fact, one more, what Dr. Passeri exactly pointed out was, when the Chinese interests are attacked in Myanmar, this is when things are escalating. We saw that happening on Sunday, and then on dates over 79 people dead. In fact, Dr. Passeri might have maybe an outdated number of deaths. There are already reports of over 180. by the UN agency. So these, I mean, exact, we don't have exact number, but it's approximately between 180 to 200. And we would see likely this is going to escalate. There will be more deaths, and possibly we will see humanitarian crisis, people fleeing in hundreds, if not in tens of thousands. We will see that is happening. In fact, we have seen in a report that Thailand is already preparing to welcome this refugees into their land. And I'll stop there. Of course, I'm happy to take questions. Again, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having this session.
Thank you so much. So because due to the sensitivity of the issue, so we will apply the Chatham House rule. So for the discussion session. So right now I will stop the recording.